which I then focused on food chemistry and other things. I became a member of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute to try and find better ways of managing diabetes than the current accepted method. At the moment, we've got about 1 million Australians being diagnosed with diabetes, and of that, about 2,000 of them will eventually die from complications of being diabetic, the long-term effects. And that is things like you'll get eye disease, nerve damage, mobility. It mainly affects the vascular system, so your circulation becomes poorer and you get complications from that. There's also the depression and anxiety of dealing with a progressive disease, having to put up with it every day. Diabetes never takes a day off. It's not one of those ones you can build yourself up and then get like with some of the diets where they say, all right, stick to the diet for the week, and then on the weekends you can go out, have a party and reward yourself. You can never do that with diabetes. It's every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, most people aren't too clear about what diabetes is. You see it on the TV all the time and you get lots of warning messages, oh, don't do that, you'll get diabetes. Basically, diabetes is where the body doesn't really produce enough insulin or is insulin resistant. And insulin is a hormone that we use to get glucose into our body cells, and that powers our entire body. So if you've got problems with insulin, you can't get the glucose into the cells, which means you don't have any energy, which means you slowly run down. It's like trying to run a car without any oil in the tank. You can keep driving around, but eventually the whole thing just seizes up. So type 2 diabetes is the most common one, and this is where people become insulin resistant. So for a whole variety of reasons, you can become insulin resistant. A lot of people are genetically predisposed to have some insulin resistance. And the result of being insulin resistant is you'll get too much glucose in your bloodstream. And too much glucose in your bloodstream causes ketoacidosis, which eventually can lead to coma and can kill you. So, and then there's and basically this is treated by using strict diet and exercise to try and bring the glucose levels down, so that they're in a level that your body can manage with that. And then there's the other sort, is type 1 diabetes. And this is the genetic one. This is where your body produces no insulin. So you have to inject the insulin instead. Children are born with it, but it doesn't show itself immediately. The pancreas will still produce some insulin, and then over several years it'll slowly run down and then stop producing insulin. So you'll get type 1 diabetics, also known as juvenile diabetes, but that can be diagnosed anywhere from at birth all the way through to about 20 or 30 years of age. You can still get type 1 diabetes. So basically, living with type 1, like the one that I've got, it consists mainly of injections, testing, carb counting. You have to inject the insulin into your body, and then you have to balance the amount of carbohydrates that you're going to eat to correspond with the amount of insulin that you've just injected. And the only way to do that is to test your blood on a regular basis. So in my own case, I inject insulin about 4 times a day, and I have to check myself 8 times a day to make sure that those levels are correct. So I'm effectively testing myself every 2 hours. There is new products on the market now like insulin pumps, which there was a big fuss about in the news recently. This is like a tiny little IV unit that straps to you, and that injects insulin throughout the whole day. This way you get around that whole having to inject every 4 hours. The little machine does it for you. You still have to test though. So you still have to constantly test even though you've got this pump machine. Now, if you are rich enough, you can buy a glucose a continuous glucose monitor that actually connects to the pump. That will monitor your glucose levels and adjust the pump according to what your glucose levels are like. But the entire setup costs about $15,000. That's with your government subsidy. And then it costs about $5,000 a year to just keep it running. And these machines will last about 2 years, and then you'll need to buy a new one. So unfortunately, like a lot of these chronic diseases, there's a little industry has built up around it, because pharmaceutical companies can see there's a lot of money to be made by producing these machines. And then it gets dispensed more on the grounds of financial ability rather than medical need. There are third world countries where even insulin is impossible to get. So type 1 diabetics there are basically surviving with no or very little insulin and just trying to cope as best they can. So your body will still keep functioning without insulin, but as I said, your sugar levels will rise. Eventually you'll get ketosis and go into a coma and die. This is not immediate. It can take a long time. There are some other there's often talk about cures for diabetes. So you can get pancreas transplants, which are very iffy. Most of this is still very experimental. So they can transplant pancreases, then you have to take anti-rejection drugs for the rest of your life. So you're not taking insulin anymore, but now you're taking an anti-rejection drug instead. They've done some very good work with islet transplants, where they just transplant the little beta cells, and these are the ones that get destroyed by your immune system and stops you from producing insulin. So they found a way of just injecting you with those tiny little cells with a little protective cover around them. So that's the latest development, and they're having some success with that, but it is still experimental, so it's going to be a while before the human trials will let that onto the market. Okay, so when I was first diagnosed with diabetes, they put me under the standard treatment diet. So, which is basically a no carbs, high protein, so lots of animal products, very little carbohydrate. So the logic behind that is that without any carbohydrates, your sugar levels will stay low. And that way you don't get the complications, and you can survive. So you keep injecting the insulin, you don't take very much sugar, and you eat. And to make up for that, you have to eat lots of animal products. You have to eat lots of non-sugary things. You don't get to eat any fruit, no pasta, no bread, because that's all got lots of sugar in it, and that'll push your sugar levels up. So they stuck me onto one of those diets, right? And I was following it religiously. I had a science degree. I did everything to the book, measured everything regularly, did lots of testing, and I was actually gaining weight. So I was on about 800 calories a day, which, if anyone's been on a diet, then you know that's about half the daily intake for an adult. And I was still gaining weight. I got up to about 120 kilos on this diet, which really didn't seem to make sense. So I'm on a doctor-prescribed, low-carb, high-fat diet, and I'm putting weight on and feeling incredibly tired and hungry all the time. So I did some research with what was going on there at the actual molecular level, and it turns out that what was happening is the high fats that I was having in my diet were actually blocking the insulin receptors in my cells. So without the insulin to get into the cells, the glucose can't get into the cells. Insulin acts like a little key, opens up the cells, allows the glucose to come in. But when that's blocked, the glucose can't come in, so the glucose is running around in my bloodstream. Right, so this is pushing my sugar levels up. So I'm eating a tiny little bit of carbohydrate, the sugar levels are going up, and the body's going, oh, we haven't got any insulin to, the insulin's not working. What are we going to do? If the sugar levels go up, he'll go into a ketosis, coma, death. So the body goes into panic mode. And the only thing that it can do is take that carbohydrate that's in your bloodstream and layer it on as fat. And that way it can deal with it later. It's gotten the sugar out of the bloodstream, so the danger is over, but you're getting all this fat getting layered on. Because without the insulin, there's no way it's going to rip the fat out and stick it into the cells. Which is also why I was feeling hungry all the time too, because all my cells, none of the cells, so your heart, your lung, brain, none of them are getting any sugar. So they're all saying you're hungry, you need more sugar. So what I had to do then was we tried removing the fats and the oils from my diet, which took about a week of removing animal products and added oils, and my weight started to drop. And shortly after that, I lost 40 kilos and came back down to my correct weight, so 80 kilos, and that stayed stable. But there's a problem with this. So now I've got no fats in my diet, and I've also got low carbohydrates. So what was happening is my sugar levels are now dropping too low. So I had to find a way of getting sustainable energy for the whole day. So then you look at athletes, and there are a lot of vegan athletes out there, and they're running marathons and they're doing powerlifting, and they don't have low sugars. So what they're doing is they're eating lots of carbohydrates but no fats. So I adopted the vegan lifestyle, even though according to diabetes management you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to eat any carbohydrates. But I was basically starving to death, so I ate lots of carbohydrates. And that worked. I was getting much better sustained energy, and it wasn't going into my bloodstream. So my cells were using up this long-term energy. But you have to do it properly. You can't just go, oh, I'm going to go vegan, that's it. You have to have 4 major food groups when you're vegan. So you've got legumes, fruit, multigrains, lots of all different sorts of grains, and vegetables, green leafy vegetables. So everyone says, oh, where do you get your iron from? Where do you get your protein from? The green leafy vegetables have pretty much everything in them. Lots of iron, and they also come complete with vitamin C. Now, vitamin C allows your iron to be 5 times absorbed 5 times more efficiently. So the little green leafy vegetables, even though they don't have as much iron as a big steak, they do have it in a form that your body can actually take up. The big steak, your body has trouble getting the iron out of the steak. It has to use up a lot of its resources to dissolve the steak, get the iron out. And meaty products can actually cause a calcium deficiency, in that your body is using that to break down the meat. So I know there's a lot of debate about iron and that, but the vegetable source is really good. So I was basically, I got my sugar levels down, meaning no complications, meaning a lot better mindset as well. So the veganism didn't just become a change of diet to change things, it also became a change of mindset. So I was living a much more happier, optimistic life. I could actually see a future for reversing the diabetes and the complications, and growing stronger and living a relatively normal life. Even though I still have to inject the insulin and test myself, at least I've got energy, I can get about, I can think, do things, pretty much act like a normal person. And then there was also the stigma, because people go, oh, well, you're vegan. Don't you find that there's a certain stigma about being vegan? Well, there's a considerably more stigma about being diabetic. The first thing that people think of when you say diabetes, and they go, oh, yeah, that's from poor lifestyle choices. You know, oh, he needs to lose weight and exercise more, and then you get rid of his diabetes. I know lots of people who had diabetes, they lost the weight, they got rid of it. You know, and it doesn't work like that, especially with type 1 diabetes. Just losing the weight doesn't miraculously make it disappear. You know, you still have that insulin resistance in there. So I could now go around and tell people, when I go to restaurants and things, and they say, oh, what should we make? You're diabetic, what should we make? We don't really have a diabetic plan on our menus. What can you eat? And they usually fob you off with something like a green salad, no dressing, no sugar. The first thing they do is hide all the sugar, like you're some sort of sugar addict. But now I could go to restaurants and do bookings, go on flights and say, I'm vegan. I just want a vegan meal. No saturated fats, lots of carbohydrates, you know, and to be served on time, please. There's a lot less stigma associated with veganism than there is with having a chronic disease. And I found the whole vegan support group really well. I went to a vegan restaurant and I said, oh, I've got diabetes, I'm not really allowed to have any saturated fats in the meal. And rather than just being the waiter just go, oh yeah, order that one, that's safe, you can order that. The chef actually came out and sat down and wanted to work out, I could modify this, I could cook this a little differently. He was fascinated by the whole idea, because most vegans are looking at how food works, and they're very much into vitamins, minerals, and that. So when they meet another vegan, it's not, oh yeah, you're, you know, oh yeah, don't let anyone know that we're both vegan, sort of thing. They do the secret handshake. It becomes more, oh wow, you're vegan, hey everyone come over, he's vegan. We got another one. You're sort of welcomed into the fold. So that was incredible, because being diabetic and having to associate with other diabetics, most diabetics will not tell. They don't tell their family. They don't tell their work colleagues. They keep it very much to themselves, and it's not easy to deal with a chronic disease if you're too scared to tell anyone that you've got it. You feel very alone and you get very depressed. At least this way I could go out, and I got this incredible support group, which again created a much better mindset for dealing with the chronic disease. I knew that there were people out there who wanted to help me and encourage me, you know, and were fascinated by the whole, you know, inability to produce insulin. They didn't see this as a bad thing, they saw this as just different. So with this, I'm going to give you a quick little chemistry lesson. There's a blood test called an A1C. And what this does is it measures your sugar levels over a 3-month period. So it's a special test that they can do. And it's the test that they mainly use to determine whether you have diabetes or not. So I can give you the full technical bit, but we'll just call it an A1C because the actual name is very complicated. But to put it into practical terms, the A1C for a diabetic, the target level that they give you, is you need a 7.1% A1C. And that's the goal that the Western medicine sets for people who have diabetes. and